Moving on to the application through UCAS. With Oxford, you have to start everything early. The UCAS portal opens somewhere around late June. You can check that up easily on their website because the university usually has a very detailed timeline available on their website for their students. And it really is wise to get to work on your application, especially on your personal statement and on your recommendation letters as early as possible due to the early deadline. Oxford has one of the earliest application deadlines, which is on the 15th of October, which would be less overwhelming if it was only one university we're talking of. Which brings me to my second point, that UCAS allows you to apply to only 5 universities, but it is more of a one-for-all process, because in one admission cycle, you only write one personal statement and you only get one reference letter to submit, which goes to each of your 5 universities. So this both has its pros and cons. It has its pros because you only write one letter, unlike the US system where you have to write different essays for individual universities, which is pretty cumbersome and time-consuming if you think about it. But on the other hand, it also means that you cannot specify any university names in your personal statement. You have to be very strategic, you have to write it accordingly. On the other downside, it also means that if Oxford is one of the colleges you're applying to, and if it has an early deadline of 15th October, it means you have to send in your application to each of the universities by 15th October, even if the other universities have a later deadline. So you really have to quicken up your work for the entire application process. The personal statement is something you need to be very strategic but also very candid about. As I mentioned earlier, the UK system allows you to write only one essay. It's kind of like the Common App essay, the one that you write. So you have to ensure that you keep a very generalized view, but it also has to be a little academic because UK is more about academics than the other extracurriculars. In fact, with that out of the way, I'd like to also mention that the point of the personal statement on UCAS is to show how passionate you are towards the subject you want to study. Even the smallest things can count. You can list down books you have read related to your subjects, you can list down scientific articles, newspapers, you can list down something as simple as science fair projects. However, what is really important in a personal statement is that you do not list down anything, but rather that you must ensure that you write and reflect and evaluate how the entire activity, the array of activities that you're writing has influenced you or inspired you to study your subject of choice. So do not simply end it by saying that you worked on a science project, but rather tell them how you researched about that topic, what you learned, whether you did something later on to build on that knowledge, because that is what the admissions panel wants to see. And remember that your personal statement is something that the tutors will definitely bring up at your interview if you do get selected, so please do be genuine. Next comes the admission tests and written work. Some courses in Oxford require you to sit for an admissions test, in which case you really have to register for it by 15th October, which is the same as the deadline for the UCAS application, unless an earlier deadline is mentioned on the website. My course, Biochemistry, did not require an admission test. However, if your course does, the university website usually has a lot of resources to help you prepare for the tests. It also has a lot of sample papers and past papers for you to practice from. So please do consult the website because it is really helpful and it is there for you to use. You can also find out if your course requires marked written work to be submitted. It is usually required for arts and humanities and social sciences, not so much for the sciences, and they usually need to be submitted by November as well. Also, since the application to Oxford has a few extra steps than most other universities, which can make it a little overwhelming as most of it happens pretty early on, don't fret, relax, and keep a very sharp eye on the deadlines. Next comes the recommendation letters. For For the UCAS reference letter, you can only choose from your principal or your counselor, who can give a holistic view of your performance both inside and outside the class. In my case, I had really good relationship with my counselor, as I had worked with him outside class and clubs as well. For the scholarship application, I chose to take it from my biology teacher. When choosing recommenders, my advice would be to choose someone who knows you truly as a person and has interacted with you, and to give them an ample amount of time to prepare the letter and give them guidance lines, or even a template if you can, to make the work easier for them. Remember, they're teachers and they're really busy, and it is important that you give them enough time if you want to get a good letter. Also, take some time off your own schedule and talk to your recommender about what you want to study, what inspires you, why you want to study, what you've done out of school, and give them the context of the university, what they require, because taking this little time off and talking to your recommender really helps them get a clear idea of your context, of your circumstances, and it helps them write a better reference letter for you, because that is something that will be very contextual and comprehensive for your admissions tutors, and they'll be able to take into your context into consideration. So that is very important. So try and do that. I'm going to talk a little about myself and my activities. As I mentioned earlier, I study in SFX Green Herald International School, which is an English medium school. It is a missionary school following the Cambridge International O and A-level curriculum. I had 5 A-levels consisting of biology, chemistry, pure mathematics, further mathematics, and physics, and 10 O-levels with environmental management, economics, Bangladesh studies, English language, Bengali, and additional mathematics alongside the sciences. The required qualifications for Oxford are usually stated on the Oxford website for each individual country. So you can just check that out later when you have time, beforehand preferably. As for the SATs and as for the SAT and IELTS, the SAT subject tests and SAT is not really important for Oxford. This is because only USA students are required to take the SAT as compulsory, and for the international students that is not really something that the Oxford tutors want to see. It's not important. I took the SAT subject tests for my US application and was unable to mention them in my UCAS because I took them in November while the UCAS deadline for Oxford was in October. However, that really does not matter for those outside the USA, and what you should really focus on instead is your IELTS, which is fairly easy if you have a good grip on your English. My advice on preparing for that would be to practice a few past papers which are available online and to brush up on your writing skills, which is very important. And you will be fine. One thing about the IELTS is that there are 2 forms. One is the UKVI academic IELTS, which is something that the visa office usually requires. However, Oxford usually discourages you from taking the UKVI IELTS because it's usually very expensive and it is not something that is very necessary, at least not for Oxford, but do check in with the other universities that you apply to so that you know beforehand whether that's going to be necessary or not. For Oxford, they vouch for your English competency when they send you in the CAS number later on. So you don't really need to take the UKVI for Oxford. You can just take the normal IELTS academic test and that will be completely fine. On my personal statement, I mainly chose 2 themes to express my extracurriculars. One was my passion for writing and the other was my social commitment. I was the editor-in-chief for my school's environmental club and science club. I had a little blog of my own on different scientific issues which I usually wrote about, and was scriptwriter and director for the school's theatre club. On the other hand, I also did voluntary work in 2 NGOs abroad on child sponsorship and microfinance, and I taught for a while in my school's evening charity school, which counted as positives for me in my scholarship application for social commitment, So if you're applying for scholarships, you should probably go towards social commitment works outside of your classroom, because that is going to be an added value in your application. I was also the joint head of research and development of a student-found environmental activism organization, and I did a few other things. So what this really did was that I showed that I was down for obtaining diverse experiences in the fields that interested me, which in my case was writing and social work. And while my reference of various books that I'd read and news articles and science projects showed my passion for my course, these fortified the concept that I'm willing to invest time and energy into things that interest me a lot, outside of my passion for my desired subject. And this is very important for the admissions tutors, because they really want to see that someone is willing to go to lengths to find opportunities and to work, be it outside your fields of interest, be it within. They want to see that initiative to go and work, to get as much experience and knowledge. They want you to be a knowledge hoarder. And that is what you have to show them, and that is what you have to be in reality if you're studying at Oxford.